Welcome to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Hartley. This podcast exists to equip and inspire your heart-centered leadership. Every week, we bring interviews with some of the greatest heart sets and mindsets on the planet. I hope the heartprint of our time spent together is that it creates new possibilities for you and all those you come into contact with. If you'd like to explore what we could make possible for you, then head to abty.co.uk/connect and book in a free 30-minute call to begin our journey together. I just want to express a huge amount of gratitude to our sponsors, Exhale Coffee. I have been a big fan of Exhale Coffee since meeting Alex and the team back in 2022. Exhale is the first coffee to be sourced, roasted and lab tested specifically to maximise its antioxidant and anti-inflammatory potency. An independent lab test has shown that 1 cup of Exhale Coffee has the same antioxidant power as 1.8 kilos of blueberries or 55 oranges. I'm a huge fan, and Mrs. H loves the decaf, especially because she knows that Exhale use the mountain water decaffeination process, which uses only pure glacial water from the highest mountain in Mexico and no nasty chemicals. Simply head to exhalecoffee.com/ABTY for your special offer. And lastly, before I introduce this week's guest, please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It would really help us leave a greater heartprint on this world. On episode 285, what a joy it is to welcome Anne McGinty to the podcast. Anne is the host of one of the most popular business podcasts in the world right now, How I Built My Small Business, where she interviews successful business owners and entrepreneurs and gets to share those insights and wisdom with her listeners. In this conversation, we talk about Anne's own entrepreneurial journey, having founded and sold a couple of businesses. We talk about why she started the podcast, and we learn how Anne has been healing from some chronic illnesses. It's a great conversation. It's episode 285 with Anne McGinty. Anne, welcome to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you. I'm really looking forward to diving in, learning more about you and all the great things that you bring to the world.
Well, I'm excited to tell what I can.
You have ventured into the world of podcasting in the last 12 months, and I just made an absolute schoolboy. I push record and I fluffed my intro. I must be under pressure because I'm speaking with another fellow podcaster.
It's fine. I mean, we can restart if you like, or just keep going.
100%, just roll with it. But I said for some reason, like, welcome back to the podcast. I was clearly just elsewhere in my thinking. So hey, it happens to the best of us, right?
It does, yes.
I'd love to know about your story into podcasting. You know, you talk about how I built my small business, and I understand that there's a whole journey of your own before you got to learning about other people and how they started their own business. Where would you like to start on that journey?
Gosh, I mean, we could go back as far as you like, and the podcast kind of happened to me. I say, rather than I chose to do the podcast. It was a culmination of various events in my life that made the idea present during a dinner conversation one night. And I believe it was 3 days later, we were going to the store to buy microphones. And I said, I'm just going to do it. We'll see. I'll give it a try. I'll commit to a year and see how it goes. And it has been a far more rewarding process than I expected it would be. So
100%. And I think from this is the first proper conversation that we've had, but I've listened to your voice a number of times, and it really does seem to be like a good expression of your personality. Like, a lot of people come to podcasting these days having been told that it's a great thing for business, right? It's almost become a business strategy. Whereas for you, I feel like your podcast is an extension of your natural kind of personality.
Well, and that's what's interesting, is that my podcast is about business, or it is interviewing experts in their fields. We don't always talk only about business, but the podcast itself, I am not operating it as a business. Money is not even a part of the equation.
Yeah, and I don't think people my wife especially. So this is 280 plus interviews, and my wife is often like, wow, like, what is the ROI of your podcast? And I'm like, how do you calculate that? Because she sees how much time and effort and like a labor of love goes into it, and she's like, what is the ROI? And I'm like, look, all I know is that I've been blessed with some incredible connections, insights, learning, wisdom. My name has been mentioned in places that I just don't think would have been possible without a podcast. And I've had the opportunity to speak to people that just, I have an excuse to invite people for a conversation that the podcast, not in existence, otherwise wouldn't gain me access to. So I 100% resonate with what you're saying is that, whilst there is a financial return in some ways to, but that far is outweighed by some of the more incredible gifts that it presents us.
Far outweighs. Like just yesterday, I was interviewing. It's actually going to be my opening for season 2, which won't
Yeah.
won't drop until the end of January. But it is a person who gets paid $100,000 to $200,000 to speak on stage for half an hour, and I got to have an hour conversation with him. So
Yeah, come on.
there's some real value that I can bring to the listeners who
Yeah.
don't have the opportunity to sit in his audience. So
Yeah.
it's really fun.
That's amazing. Well, I'm looking forward to season 2 coming out. And yeah, I understand that because I was listening to that one podcast that you put out that was, I think it's episode 22 of yours. It's like, okay, now's the time to introduce Anne. And one of the things you said is about like you grew up and you were a cheerleader. And about the personality of a cheerleader, why some people don't take it seriously. I take that stuff seriously. Do you know, my family and I, we visited Orlando in April, and in the hotel we stayed at was, I think in the ESPN World of or whatever it is, World of Sports, they were holding the national cheer competition. And and one of the I just saw how incredibly big this competition was because we had in the hotel was staying one of the teams that was competing, and the practice that they were putting in, it was just. So I do not underestimate for 1 second like the discipline and mastery of a cheerleader. But why is that? Why is that significant to you?
Well, so I wasn't a competitive cheerleader. So that I know competitive cheerleading because my
Mm.
niece does it. And she may have even been at that Orlando conference.
Yeah.
But I was a football cheerleader. And so we attended every game, whether it was home or away. But I really believed that if we could get the audience, and I think there's actually science to prove that this is true, but if we could get the audience behind the team, we could
Mm.
legitimately influence the outcome of the game. And I believed that with all of my heart. I mean, I was captain
Yeah.
of the cheerleading squad, I was captain of my lacrosse team. I had this deep inner spirit to just lift
Mm.
people up. And I still to this day believe that when people believe in themselves, they
Mm.
perform better. And the easiest way to get somebody to believe in themselves is if you support them. And so
Mm.
cheerleading is that.
Where does that come from? Like, where's that spirit been? Is that something that's been nurtured in you? Is it something that you developed into? Like, how did you connect with that?
That's a great question. My parents are immigrants from the Philippines, and
Mm.
my mother, I have distinct memories. I think I maybe was in second grade, third grade, maybe first, second, third, fourth grade. And
Mm.
when she would come home from work, a lot of times she worked through the night, but when she was home to tuck me in, she would sit on my bedside and she would say, "You can do anything that you want to in this world.
Yeah.
You can be anything you want to be as long as you believe in yourself.
Yeah.
You just have to believe." And she would tap on my heart, and you hear that enough times and
Mm.
you know it to be true.
Mm. That's so powerful, isn't it? Because like if you think that's a seed that's planted, like you just know like for maybe you don't see the fruits of that straight away, but we're talking about this, some 30 years later, and like how incredible it is to reflect on all the things that have become possible from that level of belief that you've received. How powerful that is.
And now as a parent too,
Mm.
it's the same thing, same message I want to spread to my kids.
Yeah.
Personal development, all of that inner self-talk, inner
Yeah.
self-belief, self-confidence. They say, athletes know it. They do visualizations, they see themselves winning before they win.
Yeah.
So the science is there too. It's not just a
Mm.
feeling, it's actually proven.
How old are your kids?
I have 13, 11, and 9.
Oh, fun, fun.
What about yours?
Yeah, I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, so very similar
Oh,
ages. Yeah, the social calendars are busier than ours, right?
yeah. Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned your parents there. I understand your dad was very successful when it came to business, and Is there something about the immigrant spirit, the immigrant mindset? Is there something that you think that your parents brought across with them that just meant that they were more destined to succeed, where others maybe haven't had that kind of mindset?
That grit and that fire, I
Mm,
have to believe so. I don't know where it originated for the two of them. They came from opposite ends of the track, so to speak. My dad's family lost majority of their money, and my grandfather was a surgeon, but
mm,
during the World War II, he was in the Bataan Death March, and he lost all of his partners in his practice. He watched them die, and from that point
wow.
forward, my dad had one chicken drumstick that would be shared between six family members at dinner. And so that was how he lived. And my mother, on the other hand, she had a chauffeur, a masseuse, manicurist, pedicurist. She had chefs, but she had trauma too. So
Mm,
she didn't
mm,
have the same level and depth of love that my father's family had. So this infiltrated my upbringing, and I
mm,
learned that love really does reign above all. Like, you can't have all of the riches and then not have any of the heart. It doesn't
mm,
work out well that way for you. And I've seen her struggle thinking about some of her past. Just, and then with my dad, the compassion and the family and the connection that remained once he and my mom came over to America was very strong and loving
mm,
and supportive. And I think that he helped her also with starting a new life here. But they
mm,
both had the fire that they could, because they
mm,
landed in America with just $200 each.
mm,
And, my dad, he had to fly across the country, or sorry,
mm,
across the world, land in a country he'd never been to. He'd never traveled out of the country before. He was only
mm.
21, I think,
Wow.
and landed in Baltimore. He had to get to a temporary place to stay
Hmm.
and then find a place to live, put a deposit down on that place to live, feed himself without a car, and get to work 2 weeks later to get his first job. So
Mm,
he had to make that $200 work for 2 weeks. And I think when you are pushed to a need, then you just do. And my mom was the same. She said there were times when they were down to their last $20,
mm,
and they needed the vehicle. At this
mm,
point they had a vehicle. They needed that vehicle to get to and from work. And they had to drive past the first gas station to get to the next gas station because that one took a credit card.
mm,
So they ate at the gas station if they had to. And then by the time I was growing up, I'm the youngest of four, they had a dozen houses and they took us traveling around the world. They sent us to private school and they paid for our college education. And so
mm,
it all stemmed from them, a deep inner belief that they could.
mm. It's like a story that is the old American dream. It's like, but it literally is your reality, though, isn't it? It's not just a story. And I think it's very I think one of the idea, we have children, haven't we? And sometimes like we it's you don't want to burden children with the things that you've had to grow up with, and the things that the fact that they have such freedoms, they got all their TVs, their devices, they got all, like, we can't expect them to understand and appreciate something which they've not experienced, right? It's not their burden to carry the fact that previous generations have had to do. Oh, you should be grateful for the. And I guess, how does that really get passed down? Like, it has to be something deeper, doesn't it? It has to be like the demonstration of like family values.
Demonstration, and I think oral history too,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
passing down of stories. Like,
yeah,
we were recently in French Polynesia, and we were sailing to some of these remote islands,
yeah.
and a lot of their histories are documented through oral history, and oral history is a very big part of their culture. And that
Yes.
is, but they're able to trace it back for generations because as a
Mm.
culture it has been ingrained that you have to tell your children so that they know. And it's nice.
I love that. It's the very purpose of sitting around a table, right? Like, one of the things that we try and do as a family is just eat together. Like, that nourishment around a table is like that the exchanging of like sharing time and space with each other, learning. It's your opportunity to speak into each other's days, and I can only imagine the significance of that when a culture is founded upon the idea of actually connecting.
Yeah, I know. It makes me think in this moment right now how much I need to make sure that I don't let my parents' story not be told to my kids. I need to make sure that they know it. I think they do, but there's more I think that I could tell them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad that I get to help in the documentation of such a story, so it can be listened to forevermore. But that's very powerful. Like, did you go with parents' blessing out into the world, doing whatever you wanted to do, or was your path kind of guided? Like, what was your kind of like early years into academia?
Well, you're asking great questions because you kind of nailed it a little bit. When it was time to go to college, I had always been creative and
Mm.
I wanted to study art history. I thought it was a very interesting topic, but when I let my dad know, I called him. I said, "Hey dad, I chose my major. I'm going to major in art history." And he was like, "What are you going to do with an art history degree?" And I
Yeah,
said, "I don't know. I
yeah,
think it sounds interesting." And he
yeah.
was like, "Well, you're going to work at a museum, or you're going to work in a gallery, or you're going to teach. Do those sound like careers you'd like to do?" And I said, "Not really." And then he was like, "Well, if you want me to pay for college, then your options are medicine, law, business, or finance."
Yeah.
So I chose business, or the closest major that we had to business, which was economics.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyone listening that is out there that's done an art history degree that has regretted their choices, don't worry. I did psychology at university. It was great. There were no practical jobs out there like as a psychologist, but hey, I had a great time at university, and I'm sure the listeners did too.
Well, and I do think that I could have made an art history degree work because I think
Yeah,
I had a natural business sense.
yeah, yeah.
But as immigrants, I believe they were trying to choose career paths that had a statistically greater chance for financial success.
Mm, yeah. Was there a point where you kind of like resented that, or have you always been like, okay, cool, I trust you?
I trusted them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They
Good
never,
girl.
yeah. Yeah, they've always given me, that was one thing I could always trust is if I had a question, if it was a big decision to make, I could ask them and know that they had the best intention with what they gave me as their advice.
Mm. One of the things that I know that you're passionate about is about lifestyle being the goal. Like, I think you said in that podcast is like time to live, and then the money is the resource. Like, hmm, when did that really come alive for you?
I think it's always been there. My mom jokes that when I was younger and really young, and she said, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" I said, "Whatever it is, I'm going to have fun." And, she still brings this up to this day because now I'm back to that where I'm having fun again. But in my early 20s, right when I graduated from college, I went backpacking overseas. I got
Mm,
a work visa through BUNAC, which is a program that allows Americans to work in other countries if they're
mhm,
under the age of 30. You just apply, and I don't know if it's still as easy as it was, but it was just paperwork and it was easy. And I went and traveled overseas and had the time of my life. I was
mm,
working on boats. I was meeting travelers from all over the world. I was living check to check. I had hardly anything, but I was very happy. And then when I got back to the Bay Area in San Francisco and I had to start working, I was making significantly more, but the happy and the fun just
mhm,
got sucked right out of my life.
mhm.
And I thought I'm not, I mean, it was probably an entitled way of thinking, but almost daily, I thought they're not paying me enough for what I think my life is worth. I've got to figure something else out because I want my time back. I want to have more freedom. I want to be able to enjoy the sunshine if it's a beautiful day. I want to be able to
Mm.
travel if I so feel like it. It maybe is a spoiled way of thinking, but I believed I could. And so I started trying to look for ways
Yeah,
to.
well, I think it comes down to that word that you said earlier is belief. I think the thing you say on your website is that your parents had the belief that they didn't have to sacrifice money or time, that there was a possibility for, and there is an economy that is, and. And if that's your belief, then that's what becomes possible, right?
They truly did not feel that they had the choice. And I respect that so deeply. I understand it. I was often the last one waiting to be picked up from school, sometimes an hour and a half. I'd be sitting there all by myself. And I resented them at that time, but I'm older now. And I look back and think, my gosh, what a sacrifice they made to work so hard to get us a few rungs up the ladder so that we didn't have to start the way that they did.
Yeah, I went into work. I used to work for the police service for 16 years, and I got to the point where I found my passion. I found my love for coaching and podcasting whilst I was still employed, and something just happens when you find what you're supposed to be doing in this world that you can't keep going. I became unemployable at that point. And then I started to then have to venture into the world of small business. And let me just tell you, like, I am not like built to run a business. Like, yeah, I might have the E-Myth, kind of the entrepreneur and the manager and the technician. Yeah, I'm a bit entrepreneurial with my vision, but my manager, like is required to build an actual sustainable business. That has required some nurturing and some development. Like, it's no small task, is it? Starting a business. I understand that you've built 4 of these things in your lifetime. Like, are you mad? Like, what did you like? What did you first go into business? Tell us a bit about your kind of entrepreneurial business journey.
Well, I started the businesses out of a need to reach lifestyle. Again, I wanted my time back. So I started, the first business was a side gig. I had minored in photography, trying to keep that creativity in my studies. And I printed my photographs with a professional printer onto cards that I could then sell to stores. I think I got it maybe into about 50 or 60 stores. It made at most 15,000 a year, but for me, coming from backpacking to then starting, getting an extra $15,000 was savings. So it just went straight into a savings account, but that only lasted for a couple years before I realized it was a slog. It wasn't going to work. And then we started, my husband and I, he was my boyfriend at the time. We started a Christmas lighting business when I was 26. And we hustled. I worked 12, 16-hour days, sometimes 7 days a week at the very beginning. And we grew that business every year up until the day that we sold it. So we sold it back in 2020. And that was a very good business, and it continues to be a very good business. But so the other ones were an importing business. I was for LED lights at the very beginning. And then another one was a gourmet ice pop business, which is like popsicles, but that was also very fun, but it was quickly turning into manufacturing because of the quantity you really need to make in order to make a good profit when an item is a low priced item. But in all of those, I learned so much, and I was really just chasing making as much as I possibly could as quickly as possible so that I could start investing, so that I could not work as hard, so that I could get my time back, so I could travel. And it worked. But the problem was that I was so hyper focused on it that I think the cortisol must have been just pumping in my body. And in my late 20s, I ended up developing one autoimmune condition. And then in my early 30s, I developed a second one. And then I developed a third one. So my health suffered, and I didn't know why. Back then, if you asked me, it was just autoimmune conditions are common. Or bad luck, 1 in 10 has a thyroid disorder, or 1 in 4 has an autoimmune condition. I didn't really look deeper than that until it started to seriously impact my life. And then in my late 30s is when I started to do a deeper dive into wanting to heal myself. I wasn't getting any traction. They wanted to remove my thyroid. I wasn't okay with that. It didn't seem like a solution. And I made a lot of changes. This is a long story.
Oh, it's great. I love it. I got a few things I'm going to loop back round to, but just finishing off on what you just said, like, What did you start? What were the first few changes that you made?
So I checked out every single book that I could find on autoimmune conditions, thyroid
Yep.
disease. I visited every alternative healthcare practitioner that I could. I
Yes.
tried to gather data. I tried
Mhm,
to take
mhm,
notes. So I started keeping a notebook of what was working and what wasn't working. And I did an elimination diet that was
mm,
pretty serious. It was a 3-month AIP elimination diet. I changed my lifestyle
mhm,
so that I started to say no to more things instead of
mm,
yes, slowed down, did more gardening and reading, and chose lighter types of activities. I rested a lot. I did
mm,
an adrenals protocol where it was all about sleep and rest. And at first, that was actually very hard because I didn't feel tired.
mhm.
And the protocol called for 10 to 12 hours of sleep per day, which for someone in, their late 30s at that point, that just seems like
Mhm,
overkill.
mhm.
But after doing it for about a week and a half, I got really tired and then
Mm.
I could sleep. And
Wow.
then I started sleeping deeply during
Deep
the
sleep.
day,
Yeah. Yeah.
deep, deep sleep. And that was actually a very big part of it. Doing a combination of these things got me about 75% of the way to healing. So my
Yes.
blood tests would show up in the normal range and they would stay in the normal range for a few months at a time. But
Yeah.
then they would flop back out.
Hmm.
So I was just like missing a piece. But I just kept on thinking, I've figured out 3/4 of this. There's got to be something else. And that something else didn't become apparent to me until a little bit further down the road, which we can get there if you want to.
Yeah. Let's go there now, and then we'll pick up the other story. So the story in a minute.
Oh, okay. So I, let's see, during, okay, I sold my business back in 2020.
Hmm.
And that's not that long ago. So I think everybody who's listening should remember that COVID-19 was a thing.
Yeah.
It was
Right.
a
Yeah.
real thing.
Yeah.
And my husband's from New Zealand. So we went to New Zealand for 6 months to put our kids in school there because they
Hmm.
could go to school there and everything was open. So we went over there, went through the 2-week mandatory hotel quarantine, which was extremely strict and challenging, and made it out. And we're up at my in law's house and decided to celebrate by going on a camping trip. We have a camper
Hmm.
van over there. And so we packed up. We were going to go off grid for about 4 or 5 days.
Hmm.
And I called my parents. I talked to them every single day when I was in quarantine and, up until that point. And I just said, hey, we're heading off grid. So I won't get to talk to you for maybe a week. And we packed up and left. This was probably at 7 o'clock in the evening. And
Mm.
we were leaving later that night or so. And the next morning, we had a burner phone for emergencies, just like a little Nokia. And there was a text message from my in laws that said, Anne's family is trying to get a hold of her.
Mm.
Can you please turn on your phone? And so I turned on my phone, and this is less than 12 hours later. And there was a WhatsApp message. I might start crying.
Mm. I feel you.
It said, Dad passed.
Mm.
And that was it.
Mm.
So that just ripped me open.
Mm.
I didn't believe it to be true.
Yeah.
I remember just saying, no, this can't be. I must be dreaming. No,
Mm.
no, 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 no. And I think that my kids and my husband Mark were there, and they were just trying to figure out what the heck was going on.
Mm.
And then finally I said, my dad died. And
Mm.
the grief was so deep.
Mm.
I've never experienced anything like it before. The
Yeah.
permanency, it's very hard to explain unless you have lost somebody that's very close to you.
Yep.
But the first thing that I did was I went outside the camper van and I sat on this little grassy knoll and I WhatsApped my family, my two sisters, my brother, and my mom. And as I was WhatsApping them with them, FaceTime, we can see each other. I see this really large white butterfly in the distance. And it looks like it's learning how to fly, and it's just like flying off into the distance. It's flying off towards the ocean, which is probably about 100 yards away or so. And I had kind of transcended into just another state of being. My consciousness was somewhere else. And in my grief, I know science says what I was probably flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. But in my grief, I said, Dad, if there's any way that you can hear what I'm saying, if there's any way, and I'm just doing this in my head, get that butterfly to come back over here and come and land on me. And this butterfly was flying the other direction, and it turns around and it just starts fluttering its way to me. And I'm on the phone with my family, and I'm just going, there's no way. There's no way. And this thing's coming and it's coming and it's coming, and it lands on my wrist while I'm speaking with my family. And I just burst into tears and in laughter, because I was like, there's got to be something else. If there's any way for consciousness to survive and for someone to try to send a message, then like maybe that could be the way. But so other things happened. It was really only for the first 5 days that I feel like I had tapped into this other part of reality. And eventually it did end up kind of closing back up. But I had dreams, and I could see his face, and he was smiling, and he just would say, there's so much you don't know. It's, he was happy. And I would wake up and feel really calm and really okay. And I just started believing that there's more than we know, and maybe more than we're supposed to know. And from that point forward, it really just started to make me think and question kind of what I wanted to do moving forward. And it didn't happen right away, because we were there for 6 months, and then we came back to America, and it was still months, but we got back that summer, which would have been around June or so here. And then it was in August that I was sitting down for dinner with my family, and I just said, my dad, he was so heart-centered. He was a doctor. Okay, he was a father, he was a doctor, he was a master gardener. He had probably 500 hydrangea plants that he had propagated and had grown in our garden. And even with all of that, and being a real estate investor, when the hospital had decided that they were going to completely get rid of everything they had, all the beds, dialysis machines, all the equipment, my dad said, but this is still useful. And the hospital said, well, it's old here. Like, we're not going to do anything with it. And he said, well, where is it going? It's going to the landfill. And he organized 7 shipping containers to be sent to the Philippines. And he had all of that medical equipment sent over there. And he earned a recognition from the Red Cross. And those types of things just were really rewarding to him. And I hadn't, up until that point, beyond being a mother, I hadn't done anything that felt like that. And then he was also just constantly learning. I mean, up until the day he died, he was working on researching nanoparticles as potential treatments for cancer. He was passionate about the potential to help people. And it really made me reflect on, what am I doing that's like that? Like, let me do something in his honor. And so that is where I started. And then I launched the first episode on the anniversary of his death.
Of course you did. Wow.
Because it was for him, and so together, it's like I can continue to live my life in a way that he would be proud of.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for going there and sharing that story with me, with us. I lost my nan last year, and she was very dear to me. She's effectively second mum. She was only 38 when I was born, and I lost her last year. And some things happened that I couldn't explain. The guests that came my way, like all within like a 3-day period, like I had some incredible, and I was just like, she must have played a part in making some of those things happen beyond the veil, because it was one after another. I was talking like megastars, like one after the other after the other. You know, people that I've been, people that were on my list of, I only wish I could hope I could interview these people, and they all came through within a 3-day window. And I was like, there's no way I made that happen by myself. I had help from the other side, and yeah, it's very powerful when you start to feel that comfort from a different space.
I really do believe it.
Mm,
And I think I know people who have had the same feelings where they've had experiences like that
yeah.
after a very close one has passed. And they all say the same thing. Like, yeah, it's almost like trying to describe to somebody what it's like to be a parent if they
Mm,
don't have kids. You can explain it to an extent, but until you go through it, it's you just kind of can't fully grasp it. Not
mm,
fully,
mm.
but yeah.
Because it's a heart experience, you know. Language is a product of the mind, but it's the heart, the feeling, the knowing, the stuff beyond. Did you ever get the tattoo on your wrist of the butterfly?
I did not get any tattoos.
The permanent
No, but
reminder.
butterflies are meaningful to me now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's powerful. So, you know, I think one of the things we've just obviously touched on, I had no idea the conversation was going that way. Thank you for doing that. That was very beautiful, very powerful. And the other thing is that I want to pick up on is that you said you were running this business with your husband. That is another very spiritual process. Like the spiritual refinement that we get by journeying that close with another human being, let alone in life and marriage and children, but in business as well. Like fair play,
Oh
like
my
for
goodness.
for surviving that period
Oh
of
my goodness. We work well together, but there were moments and
yeah.
we did have to learn how to divide and conquer and not overstep our boundaries.
And not make the other person the enemy, because it's so easy to do that, isn't it? It's so easy to wait, particularly when you're in your what I would call like distress, like side of yourself, like when you're putting forward the stressed version of you. It's very easy to make a caricature out of the other person of you always do this when and like particularly with my wife and I when we first became parents quite young in our 20s, it was like, oh, that's you and you're an ass, it rather than the wisdom I now have that says, she behaves like that when she's stressed, I can help. In the days where we lack the wisdom, it's like,
It's hard to do. If you're emotionally charged, it can be really hard to be
yeah,
logical.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So you talk about your 4 businesses, and you talk about there were 2 exits that were good exits. Like what for you made that Christmas lighting business a good business?
Well, it in its peak, which was the year we sold it, it only operated for 6 months a year.
Yeah.
So 6 months off a year every year.
Yep.
And there are some major advantages to having your income come in that way.
Mm.
If you receive large chunks in 6 months, you can then invest that more easily, and travel can be strategic.
Mm-hmm.
So before we had kids, what we would do was leave our apartment in San Francisco and actually sublet it. And because it was furnished, we were able to cover it plus a little bit extra for the
Yep.
furniture. And when we traveled to Nepal, my husband and I, we were there for a month or 6 weeks or something. And we set a budget for ourselves of $20 a day each. And we were struggling to spend $20 combined. But the experience was very rich and it allowed us a lot of perspective. So by pulling ourselves 180 degrees away from our real
Yeah.
life for
Yeah.
extended periods of time, could come back and have gratitude, perspective, clarity, energy to
Mm.
plan for the next season. And it was also kind of necessary because the peak was intense. And again, I do
Mm.
think that is part of why I ended up getting sick, was
Yeah.
just handling of the stress and having a hyper peak and then a trough. But I think my cortisol would spike and sort of plateau and just stay there. And yeah, it's, oh, I forgot to circle back to the last 25% of healing myself.
Yes. Let's go.
So when I started the podcast, when I thought about starting the podcast, I talked to my sister, she is hyper skilled. She is a medical doctor, integrative physician, cranial osteopath, and a burgeoning acupuncturist. So she has two Western, two Eastern. She trained at Harvard, went to Emory. I mean, she is like creme de la creme. She is up there. And I mentioned this to her, and she said, "Oh my gosh, that might actually cure you for good." And I was like, "What are you talking about? That makes no sense. What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, your thyroid is right here in your throat. You know, it's a block, so there's inflammation there. So on a scientific level, it will bring vibration to the area, bring blood flow, and it'll help kind of break some of that up. And then you will also be using your voice, which in Eastern medicine, the throat chakra would suggest that you have a fear around using your voice. And so this will get you to exercise that." So she was kind of combining the two. And my goodness, she was right.
Come on.
So my autoimmune conditions are mostly gone. They're, I'd say 95% at this point. The 5% is, I think, just time. It took me maybe 10 to 14 years to get sick and stay sick. So I do think it will take me 10 to 14 years to get better. But I believe in the body's ability to self-heal. I mean, you all can see it. You get a cut, your cut heals itself. Okay, that's like the basic level. So if our body has self-healing properties, how can we nurture those? And so that's what I've been trying to do, which is, in addition to the vibrations and how she was saying using the throat, it would drop me down from my head into my heart. Because she would tell me for years, "You're stuck in your head." And I was like, "What does that even mean? What does being stuck in your head mean?" And now I look back and I think she was right. I was stuck in my head. And now I can see it too in other people. When I see them cycling, swirling, echo chambering, or in a certain pattern of thought or behavior, mine was a stress response, sort of getting stuck and thinking about money too. But much more aligned now.
That's powerful. You know, there's a scripture that says that perfect love casts out fear. And I loved hearing from Dr. Joe Dispenza when he says that the production of oxytocin inhibits the production of cortisol, which is literally that scripture in scientific phrase, right? So like when you are in your heart and when you're full of love and gratitude and peace, as it says on the bottom of your mug, you're going to have an experience more of your body full of oxytocin rather than cortisol, because the two can't be produced at the same time. And wonderful things then become possible when your body is in a natural state, ready to, like you say, heal itself. It becomes a willing vessel to do what it does naturally.
I'm reading Joe Dispenza's book right now.
Of course you are. There's no such thing as a coincidence, right?
Yeah. I hadn't heard that part though about oxytocin and cortisol. That's very interesting to me. And it's a tool I can use now that you've mentioned it.
Yeah. The other thing, because I came to faith in 2019 and I read that book a couple of years later. And, there are a couple of things that, Jesus says no one gets to the Father through me. And what Jesus represents is a way. And he says, live this way, and what Jesus is effectively doing is getting you into your heart space, right? And then the Joe Dispenza work says that you gain access to the quantum field through elevated emotions such as love and gratitude. I'm like, well, it's the same stuff. Like, it's the same. It's saying the same thing. Like, we all get access to the infinite power of the universe, God, Creator, Source, through the heart, through the elevated feeling of love and gratitude. Like, man,
there's so many ways to say it, right? It's like people who are deeply into meditation, that's kind of the same thing too. And if you think about what they're discovering now about stuck emotions and ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences, and how emotions and toxic stress are really the root cause of something like 75% of illness. So there is some very fascinating science that is overlapping with the spirituality, which is overlapping with just this way of being that feels so much better. I wish I had only just discovered it earlier.
Well, and you may find that you have a deeper sense of purpose to this because when you bring the two intersections of what you talk about, which is your business and obviously now your well-being, there are many people that are just getting into business, believing that it has to be a certain way, which would inevitably lead them down the path. They're 10 years, 12 years before, just at the start of your unwellness phase without even knowing it, right? So there's going to be a whole heap of wisdom that people are going to need to learn from you around, okay, here's what happened. And yes, worldly success and business and freedom and travel, but also the suffering side of things. And, it's futile to say what you would do differently back then. But if you got into business today, got into a new business today, like, and you
Mm,
absolutely designed that, like, what would you make sure was, your foundational
that's a
priorities?
great that's a great question. And I believe if I were to run the Christmas lighting business again today, or any of them, the Pop Nation, any of them, I would do it so much better. I
Mm,
did it the best that I could. It's just that I didn't know what I didn't know.
yeah.
And so now I look back at even hiring, team building, the culture, how I could have done better there. I think I did well with the sales and the clients. That one always came naturally to me. But I do think that it got messy when it came to the business growing because the business wanted to grow, it kept growing, and we felt like we were sort of chasing its tail.
Mm,
And as it grew, we would hire, and then it would grow and we would hire. But I think it should be the other way around. You should probably be working on hiring before the growth so that
mhm,
you can be very careful about the candidates that you select to bring into
mm,
your company. And
mm,
I would spend more time developing the team and picking A performance players to bring in.
yeah.
And if I could do that, I think I could have grown the company from, we had 20 employees when we sold the business. I think we could have grown to 40 to 60, and it would have made more sense. But when I was in that spot, I felt like a chicken without a head on it, like running around in circles, just trying to keep up and trying to make it work. So I've learned a lot through the interviews that I've held, and
Mm,
also through this process of just being more heart centered.
mm,
I thought I was
mm,
heart centered, and now that I am more heart centered, I realized that I was distracted. I was
mhm, mhm.
distracted by money. I was distracted by investing, getting ahead, which in a capitalist nation, America is sort of propagates that
Yeah.
way of being. It's, you have to make a conscious decision to not.
Well, I think you can be heart centered, but I think when the world leaves you believing that you lack and you need something to achieve and a goal and certain things to look a certain way, then you can be driven to a point of burnout in trying to. So your country says it, is the pursuit of happiness, and I love the Indian yogi Sadhguru says the pursuit of anything first has to reveal its absence. So most people
Mm,
are coming to the world with an empty heart, trying to pursue that with which they are told that they do not have. Hey, come get happiness in a meal, or energy in a drink, or beauty in a product. That's the way of commercialism and capitalism, right? It's to first create the need. And for,
right.
for me to create the need, you need to feel like you lack or you're inadequate without the thing I have. And yeah, so it's no wonder why people feel like that. But the peace and the freedom that comes when we come into the heart space, which is, hey, I've got something that's valuable. I want to be of service with this thing. And then my heart I can still do the same behaviors. I can still grind and do the 14, whatever's necessary, right? But I do it from a position of expression, of devotion. And I think that's the kind of world that we're trying to build here with the Always Better Than Yesterday heart-centered leadership side of things. Whole hearts that are full, that serve from the overflow, rather than like because the thing with me when I went to the police, right, I was super super committed, but I would give so much, and then come home and my family would get like the rest of me. Like that's
Mm,
no economy, right? How is it that we have a
right.
business world that takes the best of us? doesn't really appreciate it, just sucks it up and takes it, and then sends us home, spits us out worse for those where we're irreplaceable. And I try and encourage people to flip that a little bit and make sure that the most important people get the best of us.
Well, so what do you do when you're having a bad day? How do you stay heart-centered?
First and foremost, it's a very good question. First and foremost, it's the self-awareness of knowing, how do I respond under a bad day? Because I was talking about how my wife and I have like, in the lacking of wisdom, when you just assume that's who they are. Well, I now have an inventory of how I respond and react on a bad day. Lack of patience, shouty dad, not great, but I'm like, oh, okay, cool. That's a reminder for me. Okay, something you need to go look after yourself. There's something that you need to get back into. I need to be effective in communicating that says, hey, not a good day. Give me give me grace and space. Or it's a case of, I need to check in. I need to give myself something which I need, whatever that might be. Bit of perspective, bit of clarity, bit of headspace, bit of time. But I think the wisdom is the self-awareness, is being able to catch it. Because bad days come. There's nothing wrong with a bad day. Like, they're going to happen. It's just I try to make sure I don't harm people in my bad days.
Yeah, like how you respond to it and not react. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
This is this is something that I'm still dealing with, just as I try to get my last 5% to full health. It's just how to handle stressful situations when my body just naturally doesn't stop producing cortisol if I get
Yeah.
stressed. So it's a challenge. But I have, breath work and meditation and reading. These tools just can be hard when you're
100%.
Elevated.
When everyone demands of you, and this is why I'll never preach anyone to have a routine. You got to figure out what works for yourself. But for me, like, that's where my mornings really give me more than they take. Because I think it's from the minute, you'll know this, business and marriage and children, like, as soon as they're awake, it's like, well, they want something from you. They're going to ask you questions.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, and like, the morning is the only time I can curate where no one needs anything from me. Like, it's my time. I think that's a word called self-fullness. I give to myself first, and therefore I'm able to overflow with the better, fruits of my spirit, rather than that which is an absence of patience and tolerance. And I think it's having the wisdom to know what helps me be at my best, and then being disciplined with doing the things that help bring that out. And then the grace and the trust of those people around me that know that if I'm not capable of doing that, then I need their love and support rather than their chastisement.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Definitely.
Because we're all trying. We're all trying. I want to be super conscious and respectful of your time. The podcasting space is great fun. What sort of unexpected gifts have you got from interviewing people?
I think that I, in the process, in tandem with interviewing, have been doing my own inner work, right? So I've been doing my breath work and meditation and trying to center myself. So I think I've become more connected to people. There is an odd magnetism that is happening now that I'm more aligned. It's kind of, you had touched on it before when you had mentioned guests kind of coming to you. It does feel like there are more people who are reaching out to me, which is great. It can be a lot though, too. But I think that I have just learned that connection over transaction, 1000% always. And I want that to be something that my kids approach their adult lives with. And I think that collaboration over competition, also 1000%, because there's just, you have to have this abundance mindset of everything. And because I'm not doing this for money, I'm not motivated in the podcast space to turn it into a living. This is my creative outlet. And I actually had an opportunity to join a network. And as soon as I mentioned it to my mom, is that, I run everything by my parents for feedback. She straight away said, you said you were doing this for fun. That's you turning it back into a business again. And I was like, she's right, but I needed that voice of reason.
Yeah.
So it's creativity. It's the learning is incredible, because when I am going to interview a guest, sometimes if they've authored a book, I'll read the book in advance so that I understand the topic. And so I've read far more than I have in the past, like, 10 years. Yeah. So my stack of books is amazing. And I've found a love of that again. And just being able to choose who I speak with and why. And to present it to the world like a photography portfolio. So when I did my minor in photography, every week we would put photographs up in front of everybody for critiques. And each photo was meant to stand on its own as an individual message, but they needed to be stitched together in an arc. Everything needed to make sense as a whole. And so that is kind of how I approach my lineup. Is I want it to cover topics that I'm interested in. They're meaningful to me for one reason or another, and they present valuable education for anybody who might be listening. I want to learn, but I want you to learn at the same time. And if people literally listen to every single one, they would probably learn as much as what I've learned. But there is something about planning for the interview, having the interview, writing the show notes, and compiling the key takeaways, and then listening to it just for quality control. It's kind of like taking a college level course. Like studying. So that is meaningful to me, because I had wanted to go to business school at one point, but we started having kids and it just didn't make sense with our timeline, and financially it didn't make sense for the investment too. So this is my business school.
Yeah, and it's been rocking in the charts as well. Why do you think it's been so popular? Why do you think it's resonating so much with people?
Somebody asked me that the other day. I was interviewed by Mikey Searock the other day, and I told him, because I looked it up at the beginning to just see like what puts people on the charts. And I found this article that said consistency and releasing more than 21 episodes. So I thought, oh, I'll get to 22 episodes and then I'll be in the top X percentage. And that happened. Okay. So I thought, oh, that's all it takes, is you just got to stay in the game.
Yes.
But when I mentioned this to Mikey Searock, he was like, that can't be true. And I was like, but it happened to me.
You ain't bursting my bubble, my friend.
It's exactly what happened to me. And he said, no, because there are other shows who are out there who have had more than 21 episodes out and they're not charting. And I was like, oh, actually, that's a really good point. So I think it's probably just an authenticity. It's topic, conversation. I'm a deeply curious person. I love people's stories. I love to support people. I do the best job that I can to try to extract what I think will be meaningful, like a really educational, insightful, inspiring episode, which is a challenge for me too, because I have not done that before. So I'm learning how to interview in a way that puts the other person at ease, but also extracts the information for the benefit of the listener. So it's,
it's a craft, but it's definitely engaged with Bess at the level, the free spirit of curiosity, like your ethos of connection over, transaction and collaboration. That's it. That's the heart-centered values that the world needs. I interviewed Dr. Bruce Lipton a couple of times, and if you're not familiar with his work, definitely go check him out. He's up there with the Joe Dispenzas of this world, and he actually talks about in his book how like the Darwinian evolution is the incorrect one. That's not. There was a guy they called Bernard Lamarck, who was a French guy who proposed a theory of evolution, which was actually that we adapt based on the stresses of our environment. So he says that evolution is the thriving of those who collaborate, not the survival of the fittest, but the thriving of those who collaborate.
Teamwork.
Yeah, 100%. And then that's true. So how much of like we've not really been told the truth of our own evolution. So yeah, absolutely. The more we dive into that, the more that we're all gonna thrive. And I love that you're someone with at the heart of this show, which is about shining a light on good people doing great things. It's the very reason why you're here. We're talking to you, and I love the fact that you're part of that too. And part of that ripple effect for me, the word I use to describe that is heartprint. You know, I use the word heartprint to describe the legacy that we leave behind, the possibilities that we create in other people's lives, and I just wonder whether you just take a moment to really think about, you come to the end of your business journey, your podcast journey, whatever that might be, whatever point you're imagining in right now. What do you hope your heartprint will be?
I hope that when people interact with me, that they have a deep sense of an unconditional belief in themselves and their abilities, and that they feel inspired and supported to pursue their dreams, that they feel peace coming from me. I just think that the world needs more peace and leadership. Leadership, I think I heard somebody say that the true hallmark of a leader is that they make more leaders.
Mm.
And I love that, because that is something that I strive to do, and with my kids, but then also through the show. I'm trying to just get the best information out there so that if anybody's thinking about starting their own business, they can learn from all of our mistakes and our successes, and they can have a shortcut. But not everybody is that way. Some people are very protective of their knowledge, and I'm not. I'm not saying that I've got all the knowledge. I definitely don't. I have a sliver of knowledge, but I just think that the world, as you were saying about collaboration, the world would be a better place if we all work together than try to like one up each other or be the first to the finish line. Like when my dad was working on the nanoparticles of gold to try to get into the because there's real science here about it works like a Trojan horse, right? So the cancers will allow these gold particles in because they don't reject it the way that they do some of the other chemotherapy and things. So they can actually get the medicine inside the cancer that way by using these gold nanoparticles. But there is kind of this worldwide race happening to be the first to get it through human trials. And my dad wanted to be a part of it because he wanted it to be open. He didn't want it to be patented. No, because he was like, what's the point of patenting it? That defeats the purpose of what a doctor is. They sign an oath, right? Or they have an oath of service to people. And so the best way to be of service would be to collaborate and share rather than to patent and own and then charge like this much. So
yeah, beautiful. It was a different paradigm, isn't it? It's a different paradigm. It really does require a different set of values and virtues. And yeah, thank you for embodying and living the legacy of your father as well, because yeah, it's testament to him that the way that you lead and you demonstrate that. So thank you for doing that.
Trying, not always getting
we
it
all
right.
try, yeah. We all yeah.
And then there's this too. So
100% daily reminders. Right? Daily reminders. Yeah.
Peace does not, it's not mean to be in a place where there is no noise, trouble, or hard work. It means to be in the midst of those things and still be calm in your heart. So
100%. 100%. Are you providing business mentorship? Are you mentoring business?
Nope.
Business?
No. I've had people ask me before. They're like, "Oh, you should be a coach, or you should be a mentor. You should do." I haven't currently. I would mentor people for free. Like I don't need to make. I don't need to make a revenue stream from this. Yeah. This can be my little package of creativity that is just given back. But I make my money elsewhere. So this is truly creative.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to be a prophet. I'm really not, but I definitely see a future for. There's a lot of value in particularly young, driven female entrepreneurs that are going into business that don't want to lose their health and sanity in the process. That I think speaking to someone like you would be incredibly valuable.
Oh, that's really good to, yeah, I will keep that in mind.
How can people connect with you? How can they find out more about your great work?
I mean, there's my website. It's AnneMcGinty.com. That's Anne, ANNEMCGINTY.com. I have an Instagram profile that I don't really post on that much, but it's Anne McGinty Host. It's just a few behind the scenes here and there, but I'm not very active on social media. I am a little bit more active on LinkedIn, but also just I choose to live as much of my life in the real world as I can.
Good for you. Good for you. And thank you so much for bringing your heart to the world. We'd be honored if you'd leave us a final thought.
A final thought. I think that my final thought would be to just, if you have that negative self-talk in you that tells you that you can't do something or you're not good enough, to acknowledge it, recognize it, but separate it out as if it is its own person and speak to it like it's its own person, and just tell it that it's not in charge and that you're in charge, and you appreciate that it's there. You recognize it's scared and has some fears, but you believe in yourself. And so you're just going to put it in the back seat while you take the driver's seat.
Great advice. And thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
Hey, my friends, thank you for making it to the end. I hope that our time spent together today has left you a little bit better than before you push play. I'd really appreciate if you just took a moment to leave a review to allow me to meet more people where they are and hopefully leave them a little bit better too. If you're curious to know how I, through Always Better Than Yesterday, can serve you, your team, your organisation, then head to alwaysbetterthanyesterday.com to connect. And while you're there, let me know one or two things that you're going to do as a result of listening to this conversation. I absolutely love hearing your thoughts, your reflections, and the things that this spark in your own heart and mind. If you want more insights from my heart and mind, I do send out short episodes on a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday, and again, I hope that they serve you well. I appreciate you listening. I'm Ryan Hartley, host of the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast, a podcast for heart-centered leaders just like you. Keep leading, my friends. Always love.